So just so you know, Scott Schulte is the Senate Treasurer, and he is going to be leading our meeting for those of you that can see him. We're very, very grateful that we have Scott's leadership. Scott, you've been the Treasurer of the Senate for how long?
I think I'm in my 13th year, if I'm
It is so awesome.
remembering that correctly. Yep.
Thank you so much. Scott has been a real asset. And he's also a member of Advent Lutheran in Olathe. So he has both the perspective of working with congregations and working with the Synod. I also want to introduce, they're here to listen, and if there are some specific questions, Jennifer Prince is with us. If those of you that do not know, she is our Portico representative. And Jennifer, which Synod? I mean, you're our representative, but you work with the whole region, don't you?
I work with 13 different synods. So of course, Central State Synod, and then all the synods in Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Okay, thank you. And Jennifer is...
I live in Waverly, Iowa. So, and it was 53 today.
Oh, well, here it was 70, you know. So, and Jennifer is, again, Portico provides the benefits for our rostered ministers, plus many at larger congregations, many employees, and is an invaluable resource. And then Janice Kibler is here with us from Mission Investment Fund. And you're fairly new to this position.
Right, this synod does have a special place in my heart, got to admit that. And I have 6 synods that I get to work with, but I live near the airport in Kansas City. And Mission Investment Fund is one of the financial partners of the ELCA. We are part of the church. So we're not a separate institution. We are the way that ELCA practices some financial management or financial management with congregations.
Great. Thank you both for being willing to listen in. Again, their role is to listen in, and if there's some resources that they can be helpful. We thought it would be helpful to kind of look at what are some of the resources that are available to congregations, both through, there's some, as you know, that some government resources that are now available to nonprofits, but looking at your own congregational resources, as you think about your own budgets, maybe what are some concerns, and Scott has done a wonderful job of starting to walk us through that as a Synod, but to look at that. So just kind of resources, and as we look at budgets and expenses. And then also, I'm kind of, in addition to being your bishop, I'm the constitutional person of the Synod. So some of these decisions that you navigate through, if you have some questions on how do we do that as councils, as congregations, in a time when many of our procedures that may call for a congregational meeting, I mean, sometimes when you talk about money, I can help navigate through that.
Okay.
So
I thought what I do is start with going through the federal government assistance items that are available. If you've been watching the news lately, you know that there's been a lot of stories about that. The CARES Act, and particularly the Paycheck Protection Program. And so I'll talk about that. And but there are several other assistance programs that are available too. So I wanted to talk about all those tonight. And then, as the bishop said, we'll talk a bit more about some things that each congregation can do as far as looking at what are some of the resources you have. I'll be glad to talk about what we've done at my congregation. As the bishop said, I'm a member at Advent in Olathe, so I'll talk about that, and then also what we have, some actions we've taken at the Synod to help mitigate or kind of address anticipated shortfall in giving. So we'll talk about all that stuff. My intent tonight is really, I'll walk through this, but I don't want it to be just a lecture, right? So I'll walk through this and then we'll have, I guess, more of a discussion around as we get out of this prepared presentation and talking about what are some of the things that we can do within each of our congregations to help address the situation. So that's what we'll do. So let me proceed. And I guess the first thing I want to share is the federal resources that are available. And there's really, I looked at it, there's two areas of assistance that are possible. One is for the employees of our congregations, right? And then the other is for the employers, for the congregations, for the synod. So for employees, there's a couple of different things, and I've kind of highlighted the most prominent one. So for our employees, the first item I'll talk about is the pandemic unemployment assistance. And this is important because typically charitable organizations, us, congregations, the synod, our employees aren't eligible for unemployment assistance because we typically don't pay into it. Now there may be some that do, but typically we don't. We are exempt from it. And so it's typically if there are folks working in our congregations that are laid off for whatever reason, that it's not eligible to them. And so the CARES Act provides this pandemic unemployment assistance, which will provide coverage for up to 39 weeks of coverage, and there's a prescribed formula for how that's calculated. And it also makes them available, if they're available for a weekly benefit, then they will also be eligible for an additional $600 of additional unemployment coverage. Now, all this is done through the state, right? So the state administers the unemployment programs for us. So Kansas, Missouri, I've perused the Kansas and Missouri websites, and determined that Kansas is not ready to roll out all of these programs yet. They're still working on it. I think they're close to that. Missouri has started with providing the additional $600, but then starting next week, I believe the date was, they are should have available or will be close to having available the additional coverage for employees that wouldn't normally be eligible for unemployment, which would be our congregation workers. The other thing I wanted to point out here for employees is there was, prior to the CARES Act being passed a couple of weeks ago, there was a Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which provided paid sick and expanded family or medical leave for employees. And so what that does is that has a prescribed benefit that employers are required to provide for employees that are suffering from the COVID-19 virus. So if there are the employees themselves have contracted the virus, then they would be eligible for leave, or if they need to leave work to take care of a child or another family member, then there's also excuse me, there's also leave that's available to them to do that. That is also paid leave, paid medical leave. That's typically, the paid sick leave is 80 hours, so basically 2 weeks of coverage, and then the expanded leave is 12 weeks for that coverage. As I said, employers are required to provide that. There are refundable credits that are available for employers, for congregations to help cover the cost for that. And those are typically available through taking a credit with the federal payroll taxes that you withhold, and then you typically would pay on a quarterly basis via a Form 941 form. The credits are worked that way, and if that's not sufficient, then there are other forms that can be filed to get a credit from the IRS to help cover that. So there's assistance there to help help each of us to cover that, for each of the congregations to cover that. There is a requirement, and I know typically we're not very good at providing the required notices for federal employment laws, but there is a separate requirement for us as employers to provide notification to our employees of the availability of this sick leave. And so I've got a link later on in here that has a link to just a flyer that you can just email out to all your employees to say, hey, here's this under the Families First Act, here's a sick leave that's available, or family leave that's available to you. All right, so that's what's available for employees. I guess I'll risk it here, Bishop, and I'll see if anybody has any questions. So you
can unmute yourself,
okay.
but there was a chat that about churches less than 50, and then also how long is the family medical leave? Like you said, 8 weeks?
It's 12 weeks. 12 weeks
okay.
for the family medical leave. Right. And then what was the first question?
It's in your chat.
Oh, okay. Let me start
for congregations that have fewer than 50 and haven't paid in. Or is this for all employees of any size congregation?
Yes, all employees of any size. Yep. Okay. Now, before I start into the employers part of this, I guess I want to see if there's anybody on here that has already successfully filed for a loan, either through the Paycheck Protection Program or the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. And there may be. So, and if so, I'll invite you to I'd love to hear what your experience was. But if there's information as I go through here that you want to share about that, please do, because I think it would be helpful for all of us to hear actual experience from a congregation that has filed for and received one of those loans.
Scott?
Yes.
Sue Jackson here from Emmanuel Lutheran in Stuttgart.
Hi, Sue.
I was not directly involved, but we're part of the Disciples of the Plains parish.
Okay.
And our treasurer for the Disciples of the Plains applied for and received the payroll protection, whatever the third P is.
Awesome. Program, Paycheck Protection Program. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Like I said, I was not involved, but they have received it already. So
outstanding. Okay.
It must have gone pretty well.
Glad to hear.
Yeah, Scott?
Yes.
Chris Lear with First Lutheran in Topeka.
Hi, Chris.
And we applied 2 weeks ago. Noon on a Monday, we were approved at 7 o'clock that evening and had loan docs in 3 days, and we've been funded already.
Fantastic. You all jumped right on it. So.
Yeah, it was primarily for our Children's Day Out program, our preschool program, with instructors there, but we also took a portion of funds for those church employees whose hours were going to be cut.
Yeah.
And
okay.
So didn't take the full amount available, just the amount of funds that they were being cut in the regular salary.
Okay. Glad to hear that. As I'll talk about here as we go through here, and as we've heard, right, that the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Program ran out of funds last week. So they first started taking applications for those loans on April 3rd, and they ran out of funds last Wednesday, actually. So which was, what was that? The 16th, 15th, the 15th. So 12, 13 days, right? And they exhausted a $350 million fund. Of course, Shake Shack didn't help that either, if you saw that story about that. But the good news is that I think we're close to having more funding approved for both of those programs. In fact, I heard on the news tonight, just before I'm joining here, that the additional funding's already passed the Senate and they're expecting the House to approve it Thursday, I believe is what they said, and I think the president will sign it later that day. So that's good news. I was reading something earlier today. One of our members of our congregation sent me an article saying that most of the lenders expect those funds to go even faster. So I guess I'll make a plug now and probably later in the presentation that if you are interested or feel like one of these programs would help you, you need to jump on this quick, because I think and like within the next couple of days, which I know is quick, right? But it will it can certainly be worthwhile to help with manage cash flow, and would definitely be worth the trouble. And I think given how quickly we saw the first round of funding go, they're expecting in the second round to go even more quickly. So just a word of caution there that we'll need to act quickly on this. So yes,
If I could interrupt, this is
yeah,
Jennifer.
please.
Portico Benefit Services, and just to let people know, if you are applying for the next round, you can access the relevant health and retirement figures on your bill on Employer Link, just so you already have access to that. So just wanted to pass that along.
Thank you for that. I accessed those a lot when I was working on working on that loan information for my congregation and from the synod. So that was very handy.
Scott, there's a question about is the notice required regardless of the number of employees? The required notice in the frequently asked questions.
The Families First Act, is that what that was about? Yeah, that I think it's regardless of the number of employees. I mean, it's really easy to do. I have a link later on in here, and I'll point it out that and it's readily available, that you can just click on it, download the form, and just email it out to employees, because obviously we can't post it in a place where they'll all see it, but it can be emailed out pretty quickly.
Thanks.
All right, so for employers, the three things I wanted to talk about here. The first one is there's an employee retention credit. And this is available, and it has some certain restrictions around it, that it's a credit that would be recovered through the employment taxes. So again, the taxes that are withheld from employees' paychecks to providing for Social Security or Medicare, it doesn't lower none of those benefits for them, but it's the way for the IRS to provide that funding. You just take a credit against what you would normally deposit for the IRS to help cover this. And this is available for employers where they are forced to close because of the COVID-19 virus, where they've had an outbreak and they are forced to close, or there's been a 50% drop in gross receipts for the quarter. So a quarter comparison to last year's same quarter. And if there's a 50% drop in receipts, then that also would make a company eligible or a congregation eligible. So there is that. And then the other two that I'm going to talk about in more detail are the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. And so let me move us along here to the next page, and we'll talk about those. Okay, so Paycheck Protection Program, or the Triple P. So what this program, it's available for small employers with less than 500 employees. This actually was part of the CARES Act that was passed in actually right at the end of March. And it was retroactive to February 15th, and the program is open until June 30th is the application period, or until the money runs out, which we have seen was way earlier than June 30th. It's provided via the Small Business Administration Loan Program through local institutions. So there are plenty of there are existing loan institutions that provide small business loans, and then also other institutions can enroll to be a provider for this program as well. I think probably the quickest way to do it is through an existing lender for the Small Business Administration, because they already know how it works and already have that process. These loans are 2 years in duration at 1% interest. And as I said, they're available through your loans. And I think it was Chris that had said they'd gotten response on like a very rapid turnaround on theirs, and the money fairly quickly. There is our documentation requirements for this. They want to see tax filings for 2019 and payroll reports. The documentation requirements can vary a little bit, just a bit based on the lender, but generally speaking, that's what they're looking for. They're wanting to see what, in a normal year, what did your payroll look like, right? And then provide a bit more information around that, because really they're going to base the amount that you can borrow is based on what your average monthly payroll was in 2019, or whatever period that the particular lender chooses to look at. So the maximum amount, so speaking of average monthly payroll, the maximum amount that can be loaned under this program is 2.5 times what that average monthly payroll was in 2019. So 2.5 times. And basically what they're looking for there, or what they're going for there, is to try to provide 2 months of payroll protection, and then we'll call it a half a month for other expenses, and we'll talk about what the other expenses are here in a minute. Payments on this loan are deferred for 6 months. So 6 months from whenever you receive the funds, you would have to start repayment of those loans. However, and this is the beautiful part about this, there is a forgiveness component to this. So the loan can be forgiven in its entirety if the funds are used for during the 8-week period following the receipt of the loan. So say you receive the loan amount on at the end of April, then you would basically, over the following 2 months, May, June, would be when you would have to spend those funds to be eligible for the forgiveness of the loan. So you'd spend the funds for the items that I'm going to talk about here in a second, and then that would constitute usage of those funds for the appropriate purpose. The other gotcha that we need to be careful with here is that they're also looking for the lenders, when you go to apply for forgiveness of the loan, is did you reduce the number of employees that you had during this 8-week period? Now, the thing is that it may be that, say, again, I'll use my example of April, May, and June. Say you did shut down and had had to furlough some employees for in April. If you bring them back during that 8-week period, then that counts. Then that would mean that you did not reduce your employment. You returned or reinstated your employment during that period to fulfill that role that they're playing. And so that would count from a lender standpoint, as far as meaning that you did not reduce your employees if you rehired people quickly once you received the funds. So what are these funds used for? If I use these funds, how do I make sure that I use them for eligible expenses so that I can take advantage of the forgiveness of those loans? So the biggest one is payroll. And payroll, by most of the banks, have defined payroll, which would include a housing allowance for pastors, right? There is, the Act itself doesn't specifically talk about housing allowances. However, I think there several of the financial institutions that I have talked to, and then talking to other accountants and other congregation members, nearly all the lenders are including a housing allowance as part of payroll, which it is. It's just treated differently from a tax standpoint. That payroll also includes, we talked about the Families First paid medical leave. If you have employees that are taking a medical leave that your congregation is financing a leave for them because they have the virus, then that can be included as a part of payroll, right? As long as you're not taking a credit for that elsewhere. So the two are kind of mutually exclusive. If you're getting a credit already, then you can't count that as payroll. But if you're not, then you could count it as payroll as a part of this payroll protection or paycheck protection program. Additional items that are covered with this are group healthcare expenses, so portico premiums, as well as retirement contributions. Those will be part of this program. Mortgage interest, not the principal for a mortgage payment, but the interest for a mortgage payment is eligible, as well as any rents or leases that you have, utilities, the usual utilities, water, gas, electricity, etc., and then any other interest you might have on any other debt obligations. So those are the items that you can use those funds for and have the loans be forgiven. So very important to use them for those particular purposes. A couple of restrictions that 75% of the loan amount must be used for payroll expenses. And I think given the way that it's calculated, most organizations will fall within that guideline, right? That based on the way it's calculated. And then additional documentation is required to be provided to your lender so that you can demonstrate, you can prove that, yeah, this is what I spent the loan amounts for. So that they have justification for giving the loan amount. Okay. Any questions on that before I move on to the next one?
This is Bishop Candia. I just want to also, many of your constitutions put a limit on if, taking out loans, that it has to be a congregational vote. This is a decision, I've talked with a few people, that you can make as a council, because as Scott said, you need to move very quickly on this, with the understanding that you are basically using this in the way that it's set out. So what you're doing is applying for a grant rather than a loan, in the sense of, and just to make sure that you document this as a council decision, that you are taking this action for this reason on this date with this plan. Again, these are times that can be challenging, but just document that that's what you're doing so that you can move quickly without needing to have a congregational meeting. So, okay.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay. So moving on to the third area that, within this that I wanted to cover, and this is let me back up, the economic injury disaster loan. I use the EIDL acronym for that, because that's a mouthful otherwise. So this is similar, although different, enough different from the paycheck protection that it warrants a little bit of discussion about. So it's also available for small employers with less than 500 employees. The maximum loan amount for this is $2 million versus for the Paycheck Protection Program, it's $10 million. I don't think we have, unless I'm wrong, Bishop, I don't think we have any congregations that have to worry about the limit here. So
no, I don't think so.
That'd be a good problem to have, but I don't think that's us. So for this program, there's kind of a couple of components here. So this loan is can be for a larger amount. However, within that, there is the ability to receive an emergency grant of $10,000, and that's a fixed number, so $10,000 to be paid within 3 days of applications for that list of things that I have listed there. So you apply for this loan, the total loan, and then within 3 days, you can receive the first $10,000 of that loan amount to be used for providing paid sick leave, for maintaining your payroll, meeting increased costs to obtain materials. So this is for businesses that because of the virus are having a greater difficulty or have to spend more for their materials, then it will help to meet those increased costs. rent or mortgage payments, and then repaying any obligations that can't be met because of a loss of revenue. So that will help with an emergency cash crunch. This program also was impacted by the by running out of the funding so quickly, and it's also part of the new funding that hopefully will be approved here on Thursday. This is different from the paycheck, the PPP program, in that this is done via a direct application with the Small Business Administration. It's not done through a local lender. So there you go directly to the SBA website, and they've got a link right there that says apply for loan, and it's a big button, and you push it and just kind of go through the steps. So some more details about this loan. So this loan it's a longer period. Like I said, it can be for a larger amount, and the repayment period is for up to 30 years. However, it's at a bit higher interest rate, 2.75%. This also has the additional restriction, I shouldn't say restriction, the additional requirements for it that they will, unlike the PPP program where there is none of this, for this loan you will have to provide, there'll be a credit check. There'll be for amounts greater than 200,000, I think it was. They have to be a personal guarantee from some members to guarantee that, and there will be some collateral requirements. So it's a bit more stringent. It's a bit more like a regular loan, right, than the PPP loan is. Payments are deferred for a year with this loan as opposed to 6 months. And then you can use, the usage of the loan is different, or I'm sorry, it's not different. It's pretty much the same for what is available for PPP. For paying fixed debts, payroll, accounts payable. However, it does have some greater items. So you notice like the accounts payable here. So if you do have a large accounts payable amount, then that could be a great benefit. If you have some fixed debts that you have some hard debt payment requirements for that are larger, this is good for that as well. Other bills that could not have been paid if the disaster had not occurred. There are some limitations here. I think they could see some parties taking advantage of this. It's not intended to replace lost revenue, nor can it be used to pay down long-term debt. So yeah, it'd be tempting to try to pay ahead on a mortgage, right? But that's not what this is for. And the big caveat here, the big difference from the Paycheck protection, is that there is no loan forgiveness provision here. So if you take out this loan, then it can be repaid at any time without a penalty, but it has to be repaid, except for that initial $10,000. So I talked about, on the previous slide, I talked about there's this initial emergency grant that you can receive of $10,000 within a couple of days of the application. That is a grant, so you don't have to repay it, but the rest of the loan must be repaid.
And that does make it more challenging, just to be upfront with everybody. It makes it more challenging to actually take out a sizable loan without having a congregational meeting. So if that's something you're thinking about, I would encourage you to either email me or give me a call so we can talk through how you do that constitutionally.
All right. A couple of miscellaneous items I wanted to hit here real quick. The bishop already talked about one. I was going to segue into about approval for taking action, so we covered that. But there is a provision in the CARES Act that is encouraging charitable contributions, wherein $300 cash contributions can be made that will be deductible, and this is regardless of whether a person itemizes or not. So this is for 2020 only, and it's there to encourage additional cash contributions to charitable organizations, us, right? If folks were so inclined. So not a huge amount, but it's still $300. And the other aspect of this that is of note is there is also a capability, if you don't take out a paycheck protection loan, that you can delay payment of the employer share of Social Security and Medicare taxes. Those will have to be paid later, but you can defer those until half of those need to be paid by the end of 2021 and the other half by 2022, which is amazing to me that they would push it out that long. But that is available. I still think, given the choice, I think the paycheck protection is a much better way to go here for that. But I thought I would mention that. Okay, and then early on I promised some links. So I guess my thought in sticking them on this page was that we can probably send this presentation out, Bishop. I'm
Yes.
hoping, and so everybody can have these links. These are links to places where you can find reliable additional information about all of these programs, because you can see they start with this one, SBA.gov, Treasury.gov, government websites. I think you can trust those. SBA.gov, this is for the disaster assistance loan application. So I said, you go to the website and click on the apply for a loan button. If you click on this link, it takes you right to that page. And then this link is the one that if you go to it, it will bring up that notification poster that you need to provide to your employees about the Families First medical leave information. So it just lets them know. Well, in fact, I think if I click on it, it should bring it up, but you won't be able to see it. It will let them know about the availability of the program and how they can apply for it and that sort of thing.
And we will, if you send them to me, we'll make sure they get to Tim and immediately on the website. There are a couple questions on the chat. Can you see them, Scott?
Chat. Yeah, let's see. Okay. Okay. Let me back up and make sure I've seen all these things. Medical leave.
I think just the last two.
Last two. Okay. So we've continued our music staff on pay even without services. Can those payroll expenses be covered by a loan? Can contracted musicians that have been continued to be counted against the loan? So the first question, can the musicians? Yes, absolutely. Those will be part of the loan. That's part of what we covered for my congregation. And then contracted musicians. So I'm assuming these are musicians that are not employees, but folks that are temporarily engaged or are engaged on an ad hoc basis that have been continued to be counted against the loan. They can, actually, I don't think they can be covered by the loan. And the reason being is that they are eligible. They could apply for their own their own loans. However, if they are contracted, that might be a gray area where I would say talk to a lender about that to see whether that should be covered or not. What concerns me there is if we've contracted with them, whether they could then be covered as a loan on your part, or whether if you cancel the contract, then they could also apply for a paycheck protection loan to cover the loss of that gig. There is a they call it a gig-based loan, which I think would apply here. Does a congregation have to use the EIDL to benefit from the $300 cash contribution deduction? No, that cash contribution is available for everybody. So regardless of whether a congregation has the loan or not. So I think that's something that we need to kind of publicize. And I think that's it.
Thank you, Scott.
Any other questions? Okay. Let's see. I think that got me to the end of. Yep, it did. Okay. So let me back up. Are there any any questions, any items that you want me to kind of run over a little bit more before we move on to other topics?
And people can unmute themselves, I think. They've been doing that, so. Okay.
Scott, I have a question. This is Ann Runquist.
Yeah. Yeah, man.
Okay, so we sent in an application after the money had already run out. Do
Okay.
we reapply?
I don't.
We sent it to our bank.
I don't. So you sent it to your bank? I don't think so. No, I don't think so, because I say that because for my congregation and actually for the synod, we didn't get our applications in before the money ran out, and so in talking with our lender, they said, well, we think more money is going to be coming. Go ahead and send in your application, and so it'll be there and ready to go. So I think. Did you receive any notice from your lender once the funding ran out?
No.
No. Okay. So I think that your application is waiting for the funding to come in, and that they'll process it as soon as they have the green light on that. I would say it couldn't hurt to give your bank a call just to make sure that they've got that lined up.
We tried, and they just say email us.
Email us. Okay.
Email us.
Okay.
And then I want to make sure that we did this correctly. The application is just the 2 pages, correct?
Yeah, the application itself is very simple. It's just the 2 pages. It's the additional documentation, right, that you need to provide with it, which does vary a bit by bank, right? So most of the banks that I saw, like on their websites, had either they had a worksheet that you could fill out, and then you provided them like copies of your 2019 W-2s or W-3s or your 941 payroll reports to substantiate the numbers in your application. So.
Oh, I think we filled out the wrong form. We filled out the form that was on the PPP form.
Okay.
But it was on the government website. We didn't fill out the banks, but we sent it to the bank.
Well, yeah, the application is the official document that goes to your bank. That's fine. I would say most banks, they either had a document that says, to support your loan, we need this additional documentation, because they're gonna need to see something, right, to justify the loan amount. Some banks provided a separate spreadsheet or a separate document that they wanted you to fill out. It just varies by bank.
Okay, I'm glad I asked. Thank you.
Sure.
And just so people to see, thank you, Dee Dee. She clarified the $300 is for individuals to take off their taxes. It's not.
Yes. Sorry. Sorry if I misled you on that. Yes, that's for individual contributions, right? So.
Right.
So I said, I would say we need to be pointing out to our members of our congregation that say, hey, for you that whether you itemize or don't, at least give us $300, right? So.
Because we know that's why people give. No, I'm being a little bit, you have to have a little levity in it.
Yeah.
You hope people give because we do. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you, Scott.
Okay. All right. So, Bishop, I think should we move on to talking about things to look at for as far as controlling expenses or maybe deferring expenses?
I just want to briefly though to point out
Sure.
kind of on the other side before we get to kind of looking at your expenses. Also, many congregations do have some reserve funds or some restricted funds or endowments, different things, and those funds. And we've certainly done that at a synod level. The biggest thing that if you are using some restricted funds, that you make sure again that you document that you document what funds you're using, the purpose to be repaid, because as we move through this, then and as congregations come back together, they will wonder, well, why did you take money from this or why did you take money from that? You just need to be. You need to move through carefully documenting, including if you have endowments. Many endowments that are set up do have some emergency clauses that you can access funds, but just make sure that you are following your procedures that you have outlined in your constitution or your bylaws. And then again, the biggest thing, I keep saying it, it's document, document, document. You made this decision as a council on this day because of these circumstances to do that. So if your actions are ever questioned, you can go back and basically justify, I mean, what you're doing. Does that make sense to everybody? So that's the biggest thing as you look at using other restricted funds or endowments or whatever. Any questions about that? Okay. So I think then we also, we want to kind of shift into, as you're looking at your own budgets and making priorities. Scott, did you want to say a little bit about, you know, what kinds of things do you want to make priorities? Maybe using, the Senate is already moving that direction.
Sure. So I think the biggest priority is our staff, right? That's typically the largest expense that we have in our budgets. And so I think the priority, the focus needs to be, I think, first on how do we continue to be able to pay our pastors, be able to pay, you know, the other church staff, you know, administrators, youth directors, musicians, as we already talked about. A focus on how do we continue with to support those folks as we, you know, go through this time where we're not able to hold in-person worship services, even though we may be doing it online or remotely. Many of our pastors are still working hard, right? So to do that, and so I think that's a priority. Obviously, you need to then also, the next big expense typically is around maintaining a building, and so there's a mortgage or other expenses for the building. The Paycheck Protection Program will help with that. One of the things that we did, that we, meaning my congregation Advent, that we talked about, is I talked to the Mission Investment Fund, Janice, and talked to them about, could we defer, or actually could we make interest-only payments for a couple of months? And they were wonderful, right? They made it very easy to do that. In fact, if you go to the MIF website, it talks about, you know, here's the options that we have to support you as we go through this. It can range from, the option we chose was to continue with interest only, because the Paycheck Protection Program will cover that cost. Or you could, if you so chose, you could defer payments entirely. That'll have a bigger effect on your loan, but it's, you know, again, it all depends on your situation.
And I want to do the same plug is, as you individually, if you get to the point that you're concerned about being able to pay for your pastors' salaries and benefits, it is much better to call Portico earlier and talk through that rather than just stop payments. Okay, so don't just stop payments. But all of these ministry agencies, our partners, are geared up to help us to navigate this, but they need to hear from you. So if you anticipate it's going to be difficult, reach out to Portico, reach out to MIF. Again, you'll experience they really want to be helpful. But what would be very problematic is if you just stopped sending in payments and they don't hear from you. So that would be my big plug with that. So.
Yep, I was just going to go there next to benefits. So I'm glad you did. So thank you, Bishop, for that. At the synod level, some other things. So from a priority standpoint, I think that's where we need to look, and also at the for my congregation, at least, and I think many congregations do this, our mission support amount is a percentage of what our giving from the congregation is, and so it will, and so we tithe what we receive for from our congregation for mission support for the synod and churchwide. And so that, of course, will adjust, right? If income declines, then so would that. But we felt it was important for us to continue that as well, because we know full well that, at least I know full well, right, that if congregations don't, then we'll have issues with being able to support the synod staff as well, and also then the synod likewise supporting the churchwide office and just the larger ELCA, right? So that I'd say would be another important thing to keep in mind as you're looking at impacts to your budget or areas where you can maybe make some adjustments.
And this is a good time we are committed as a synod. We give 50% of the mission support we receive from congregations to churchwide, because just as we realize, it's also staff doing ministry. Now, as that amount that we receive goes down, obviously the 50%, but it is important for us in this understanding of church together. And I would encourage congregations, some congregations just give a lump amount, but I would really, this is a time to encourage congregations, what you receive, think about how do we share a percentage beyond. And if we all do that, I mean, it's going to be tough on every level, but if we all do that, that again reinforces church together. So I just want you to know, we as a synod, Synod Council struggle with that, but we are committed to continuing to share what we receive with churchwide. So other things, Scott,
Yep.
that kind of from what we've done that congregations might want to consider?
So looking at the synod, I know that, so we took a look at, okay, what are some other areas of the budget, some expenses, either regular or one-time expenses that we could defer. So meaning that we will intend to pay them, but just not right now. And I know that there are, for my own congregation, for the synod, we have several things that are just one time that happen around this time of year typically that we could defer. And one of the things, and the bishop has mentioned this in a couple of the weekly newsletters that have gone out, is around our audit. So if you've been to Synod Assembly, you know that we every year we have an audit done. We share those results at the Synod Assembly. That costs a fair amount to have an auditor come in and audit our books as we're required to. So we this year are deferring that so that we'll take that expense in later. That helps defer the expense, but also it's a party that we're not exposing ourselves to from a virus standpoint. I guess I better be careful there. From a virus standpoint, and also having them, potentially share us, because we're exchanging documents and all that. So we delayed that this year, and that saves going to defer about $12,000 of expense, which is a good chunk of money. We also are deferring all of the grants that we typically give each year to our seminaries, to Bethany College, to Tomashinga, and to Hollis, deferring those as well. Now that's tough, because all those ministries are looking for continued support as well. But again, our intent is to pay those, just not right now, as we can get through the cash crunch. We're delaying travel, so which makes it weird for the bishop, because she gets to be home a lot. So it's which is unusual. So I think we've deferred travel for a couple of months. Well, not deferred, we've stopped travel basically for the bishop and the other staff members during this time. They shouldn't be out and about anyway. So we've stopped the travel for that. And then we also have looked at, and the bishop had mentioned this before, that looking at some of our restricted funds, about where are some areas where we could draw funds if we had to help get through the crunch here. Those of course would be used with Synod Council or Executive Committee action, so that we have the documentation and have the approval then as we kind of return to normal, to know who decided that we could use those funds and when did we do that and so forth. So all those things we have taken a look at to help mitigate what we think will be a cash crunch as we go through the rest of April and into May, and hopefully not longer, but we'll see how that goes. Which leads me to one thing I wanted to talk about, and that was giving for the congregations. And I wanted to kind of relay that in the month of March, my congregation and a couple of others that we had talked about, I think via email, that we saw giving remain fairly steady, if not increase, in March. So again, my congregation specifically, March was our best month of the year, amazingly, so far, right? We're only 3 months in, but we didn't start the year well in January and February. March improved, interestingly, and then we are seeing that improvement continuing into April, which I have to admit is surprising me, but maybe it shouldn't. One of the things I would attribute that to is electronic giving, or I'll say maybe more automated giving. My congregation uses Tithely for that, and we had started using Tithely at the beginning of last year, and it has proved to have been well worth the change we from what we had before, to use that this year, because it makes it very easy for members of our congregation to give. Tithely you can access it via a website, or there's an app for your phone. There's an app for everything, but there's an app on your phone that you can give. And so we have seen, just as a testimonial, we have seen just in the last, since the beginning of April, 20 new people enroll and give through Tithely. And so I think not only will that help continue giving from our congregation while people are not able to donate by dropping a check in the offering plate, although they could mail a check, but why do that if you can just easily, within like a minute, make a donation using an app on your phone from anywhere? That not only will help now, but it will help down the road into the future, because I fully expect that all those new givers via Tithely, they'll continue to give that way even after we get through the coronavirus, the pandemic that we're seeing now. So I'll give a hearty plug to Tithely. Also, give a shout out to Vanco as well, which is another option that's available for electronic giving. Both of them make it easy to give, and to give on a recurring basis. You can easily have the members of the congregation set up automated giving that way, and it makes it very easy for them.
And we have the same thing. We have online giving directly to the Synod to make it easy. And I want to echo what Scott is saying, that everything we hear, that the more that you can get the members of your congregation to do online giving on a regular basis, it's going to serve you well into the future. Because one of the things, as we anticipate even coming back from this, we're going to be doing a lot of, we're going to change the way we do some things, at least in the foreseeable future, which means, I know it sounds maybe a little silly, but the days of passing an offering plate, that's not going to happen for quite a while. If it ever, I mean, so the more that people can do the online giving, and I'll do a testimony. I do that through the ELCA. I went online giving when they had the campaign, and after the campaign was done, I continued to give because I'm used to that much. It comes out, and I just, so online giving, and also being honest and upfront with your congregation about where you're at. We're trying to do that from a Synod level. So, you know, where we're at financially, this is not about a guilt trip, but this is about, this is where we're at. This is what we need to continue to pay our staff. Just be upfront about that. Anticipate that councils may have to meet more frequently, and using this avenue of Zoom, You can, call together a meeting as you continue, as the landscape changes and you need to make some decisions. Call together your leadership. If you don't have a Zoom account, the Senate has purchased a larger Zoom account, and Tim was telling me in the next few weeks, we have 66 separate meetings scheduled for congregations across our
Wow.
Senate.
Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, it's very easy to set up. So continue to have these kinds of conversations and meet on a regular basis to touch base about where you're at financially, what are your options, and communicate to your congregation, to, like we've already said, if you have a loan, talk to MIF. If you're concerned about paying benefits, give Portico a call. And also, we are here, the Senate staff, while we're all working from home. Although when my electricity went out today, I had that momentary panic of how do you work from home without electricity. We are here available by email and by phone. So if there's specific questions, and I'm sure, I don't want to overwhelm Scott, but if there's specific questions, I'm sure Scott would be willing to
Yes.
to help out, but this is where we need each other. So there may be a specific situation that you're wondering, how do we navigate through this? Give us a call or email. And particularly as we continue in this, we will be sending out some guidelines as we think about how do we, when the day comes when we can start opening things up, what are some ways that we can gather. But I'll say this in as many contexts as possible. It's not like we're just going to bounce back, my friends. I mean, I think hopefully everybody realized, I mean, what you hear on the news is absolutely true. It's not like, well, we turned off the light switch, right? And now we'll just turn it back on and we can go back to. It's going to take a while to navigate through this and to actually arrive at a new normal. It's going to be different. And so some of the decisions we make about what are the priorities for our finances and our resources. And it's actually a pretty good time to say, do we really need to do things the way we've always done them before? I mean, we just had a candidacy committee meeting Friday late afternoon, Saturday morning. Normally it's people drive into Kansas City, which is great. You know, we have the conversations around the table and so forth, but it's also an expense for people driving in, putting them up in housing and so forth. And we actually accomplished everything we needed to accomplish by a Zoom meeting. And the expense was nothing. So we're learning some new ways of doing things, might we all? I know we're a little after 8. Do people have some specific questions that you'd like to direct to either me or Scott before we end? And of course, you can always email us or reach out to us. And somebody pointed out that Thriven also has a Simply Giving, electronic giving. So yes, there are options for electronic giving. And all of that information is on our website. And just so I am, you know, somebody asked for my email address, and maybe it's very simple. It's scandia@elca.org. And if you go to the Senate website, you will find Scott's email address as well.
Yes. I could even put it on that presentation a minute before I send
Bishop,
it out.
your email is at css-elca.org.
Yes, thank you. I typed it correctly, but I said it wrong.
That was a good try, Bishop. Give him the wrong email address. Nice.
Yeah. No. Other questions or?
Can I just say, Bishop, this is Jennifer with Portico, that Janice and my contact information is also on the Synod website too.
Great, thank you.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm. Anything else?
Bishop, one item that you and I had talked, briefly about is that was funding from Churchwide.
Oh, yes.
Did you want to say something about that?
Yeah. This is just beginning. We'll have information going out in the e-newsletter that you may be aware that Churchwide has started a fund appeal specifically to respond to COVID-19. And the idea is as they raise funds, they will be giving block grants to Senates Now, keep in mind, we have 65 synods, but we will be addressing that at the executive committee meeting on Friday, that how we will as a synod then disperse funds to the ministries and congregations of our synod. So there will be information coming out about that if there are some particular needs. But that is also what we're looking at. Again, a church-wide appeal. Block grants will come to the synod, and then the synod will then we need to have a team that will then disperse grants to our congregations. And of course, the needs are pretty immediate, so we're looking at very quickly moving along. But at this point, there's no grants. That I just submitted the application to church-wide just to put us in the pipeline. And as soon as we get some funds, we will let people know, and we will open it up to then also provide some funding for our congregations. So that's that part of Church Together. Remember? I knew I had to say that. But it really does make a difference that it's congregations and the synod and church-wide, we're all working together. So I think I've said it before, communicate, communicate, communicate. Okay? It's hard for us to reach out and support you if we don't know what your needs are. And then share your wisdom with each other. I mean, it's great. It feels wonderful to hear that some of our congregations have applied and they've already gotten this. And I mean, that is wonderful. Thank you so much for doing that and taking care of your leaders and the ministries that are so important. Because while we don't gather together physically in person for worship, we're doing worship in all kinds of ways and continuing to be the church. And I'm really looking, I was telling my staff, you can all hold me to it. No more complaining about the travel that I do, because once I can travel again, I am going to thoroughly enjoy, I will enjoy driving out to Western Kansas, you know? So after, I think it's been almost a month, hasn't it, Dave, since we've been working at home? So.
I think it's been 5 weeks now.
Yeah, that we have not traveled and not, yeah. So anything else that people have particular questions about? Okay, Scott will send the PowerPoint that has the links that will be on the Synod website. And all of our, again, Dave Wetter, one of the associates, is also with us. I didn't see you, Dave. You were on a different screen. His email is on there. We are here to help you and appreciate hearing how you're doing. So thank you very much, Scott. We're going to work him hard this week because he also has an endowment committee meeting and an executive. So he's just all into Synod finances.
It's a busy week, yes.
It is a busy week.
Glad to do it.
All right. Dave, could I impose upon you to do a blessing for us at the end here?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Good and gracious Lord, we give thanks, Lord, for this incredible day you've granted us and for this time you've allowed us to come together as church to just talk about the business of your church. And now, Lord, as we go about our ways this evening, may you bless us, may you grant us rest, and may you fill us with your spirit that we might go forth from our homes tomorrow or actually work in our homes tomorrow in ways that bring about your glory. We say all of this in your Son's name, Jesus Christ, our Lord. And all of God's people said,
Amen.
Amen.
All right. Have a nice evening. Looks like I need to go turn on lights. It's getting a little dark in here.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.